Hello, everyone out there in radio or internet land. It is once again that time. Our next topic, this is a little bit more broad and analytical. I wanted to feature kind of bouncing off a couple of pieces I recently read out of Jacobin to talk about the media and the state of the media. Again, a big focus of our show is kind of calling out media, both the national and local media for stuff. I'm going to tie a little bit of this into local coverage as well. Um, but there's two articles from Jacobin kind of have a similar theme. One is titled, If You're Worried About Misinformation, Focus on For Profit TV News. And the other one is about how that very same media is trying to basically manufacture consent or talking points against these $2,000 checks. So let me read just a little bit from that first article I mentioned, and then we'll expand on it. The general thesis of this article, it's very good. I'd recommend you read it. It's by Branko Marcetic. And basically, let's break down. Again, there's been a lot of focus on how Twitter and Facebook are fanning the flames of extremism. But it's almost become kind of a red herring because let's drill down. Like, what actually has the larger outsized influence on people's information diet and what they believe? And This article goes on to say, as of 2019, 53% of Americans still get their political news primarily through local network and cable television, compared to the 18% who did so through social media. This is little change from 2016, arguably the high point of social media related panic, when a Stanford survey found network, cable, and local TV were three of the four most commonly cited, most important sources of news and information about that year's election. Crucially, television is also still the most trusted source of news for millions of people. A Pew survey carried out at the end of 2019 found huge majorities, upwards of 65% of Democrats, liberals, Republicans, and conservatives trusted CNN and Fox News, depending on their ideology and partisan leaning, while similarly large majorities of liberals and Democrats putting their faith in outlets like NBC, ABC, CBS, as well as NPR and PBS. Those numbers are similar, higher even when it came to Democrats. And in a morning consult poll conducted in April 2020, people's distrust of social media, meanwhile, has only increased. The most recent Pew research found 59% of social media news consumers expect the news they see on platforms to be largely inaccurate. So this is starting to kind of paint a different picture than what you've even heard on mainstream media itself talking about social media and itself. People are actually a little bit more skeptical and discerning what they see online than what mainstream media is telling us. Now, I don't want to set up a false dichotomy. We should be very skeptical about the sources we read online. The litmus test that we use on our show, make sure, what are your sources, who funds your sources. That's a big thing. What kind of ideological bents do they have? And even making sure that like you can be nuanced in your evaluation of coverage. So, good example. A lot of liberal networks, and there's kind of an upsurge of this again, browbeat RT for being like state media. And the thing about it is, RT's coverage of issues in the United States largely is not that inaccurate. Certainly not as inaccurate as you'd see on Fox News and sometimes MSNBC. Perhaps you wouldn't believe them about what they're talking about with Russia, which is actually why Abby Martin is a very great like anti-imperialist journalist and commentator. She left the network for those reasons, but their coverage of American news is still pretty accurate. It's just it doesn't look good because my big joke is like if it's the job of some Kremlin network who's controlling RT to make America look bad, they have the easiest job in the world. They just have to tell people what's going on. Um, but anyway, I digress. Pry apart the tangled mass of 4 years of alarmist news, and you might have seen the evidence for social media's brainwashing powers was pretty thin. Here's a brief roundup of the data-driven findings of fake news on social media. False stories were a small fraction of the participants' overall news diet, regardless of political preference, just 1% among Clinton supporters and 6% among those polling for Mr. Trump. Only 1% of users were exposed to 80% of fake news, and 0.1% of users were responsible for sharing 80% of fake news. So again, it's not as overwhelming a thing as they really let on when we're talking about the spread of fake news in social media. The most systematic examination of people's exposure to fake news sites showed that while those untrustworthy sources might have a small effect on public opinion, in 2016, they did not substantially move individuals' positions. I'm going to skip down just a little bit and talk a little bit more. A host of establishment media voices are now starting to realize this, calling out networks like Fox and Newsmax in the wake of January's riot on the Capitol. And they've been spreading a lot of right-wing TV misinformation. They've been part of kind of a broader network of right-wing misinformation that goes down to right-wing talk shows, et cetera, et cetera. Some have even been talking about bringing back the fairness doctrine. However, the inconvenient truth is that Fox and other conservative media don't have a monopoly on TV misinformation. Trump's election victory was based on about $5.6 billion worth of free earned media on ostensibly liberal networks as well. Also, it's important to point out some of the most pervasive misinformation in the last few years was incubated and spread through legacy media, particularly cable news. And I want to point out all the various conspiracy theories about the Kremlin's supposed infiltration and control of U.S. society and political system. And that's not to say that he didn't do nothing, but the degree to which Russia influenced the elections has always been extremely hyperbolic, and exaggerated. And I think a lot of it goes to the fact that these are for-profit cable companies. The Russia story sold a lot, especially older people who are more inclined to watch network news. There's still like the Red Scare, Cold War mindset. It bumped up ratings. However, that had the effect of them sharing a lot of inaccurate stories. It led large numbers of Democratic voters to erroneously believe that the Russian government had actually hacked voting machines. And I really want to touch on this because not enough people have talked about this. All of that focus in the last few years of trying to pin a foreign actor as influencing our elections and all that stuff, it really set the stage for Trump to try to do the same thing in 2020. He wasn't the first one to make allegations about foreign influence on voting machines and all this. And a lot of both sidesism that lately been going around about free speech and stuff. And it's well, how about this? Liberal misinformation can also kind of justify and set the stage for right-wing and misinformation. That's still going on other issues. TV news has boosted people like New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, including CNN and these praiseworthy comedy routines on the main networks. But it made it possible for the governor to enjoy these sky-high approval ratings for the past year, despite an unceasingly abysmal response to dealing with the pandemic. And it goes on to say there are many ways to fix the TV misinformation problem that don't involve heavy-handed censorship. Limiting commercials on news programs, summoning network CEOs to Congress, done with tech executives, or breaking up monopolistic media entities. Bingo, bingo, dingo, dino, DNA. So again, that this article I think really goes to speak to something that hasn't really been talked about in the wake of the January 6th Capitol riots, and it's that a lot of people trying to blame this on Parler or Facebook, or the ability to mobilize on Facebook or social media, and that is a problem. We've reported on stories like that before, but when it comes to how all of this misinformation is getting out there and into our social ecosystem, the blame really does rest at the top. It rests at Fox News and Newsmax. Sinclair Broadcasting, which owns WWMT. Actually, the story we were just talking about really sheds a rosy light on Lee Chatfield. It doesn't mention any of his weird connections to the coup, kidnap plotters, any of that other stuff. It really gives a warm light to his plans on how to bring like kind of economic authoritarianism approach to our city. It's not critical at all. And of course, that's because WWMT is owned by Sinclair Broadcasting, which is a largely right-wing network. If you watch their coverage, it's interspersed because it's oddly interspersed with like local, social interest stories that are kind of neutral and like, oh, let's bring on Sinclair Pundit to talk about how great Donald Trump is, or why everybody's exaggerating about the insurrection. So these issues really paint the way that we understand our cultural environments. It goes back to think about Antonio Gramsci. His A lot of his work, his prison papers were about cultural hegemony, and it's about how capitalists kind of bake this worldview into the media and culture to make it seem like their worldview is the only one that is real. And at a time when the capitalists are kind of like in crisis and at war with themselves, we've literally been seeing like, this culture war has calcified into competing visions of reality. And the truth, like the real truth, has been like the first casualty so often when we're talking about this stuff. Uh, and that also goes into, I wanted to talk. Oh, by the way, fun fact: Antonio Gramsci was translated by a man surnamed Buttigieg. Pete Buttigieg's dad. There's I don't know what it is. A lot of these neoliberal shills had like, if if you're gonna be a Marxist dad, an attendant father. Otherwise, you're gonna poop out a Kamala Harris or a Pete Buttigieg or something. Oh man. Anyway, there's another related story when we're talking about media criticism that also it's kind of like the same themes. It's called Mainstream Media Really Doesn't Want You to Get a $2,000 Check. And it's about how a lot of these mainstream press outlets, from MSNBC, Washington Post, the right wing ones too, are working overtime to bring on these pundits to talk about what a bad idea these $2,000 survival checks are. I'm going to read a couple of excerpts. So uh, uh, it cites in a quote, I don't think the $2,000 checks make much sense. This sordid tale started in December, a few days after Congress passed a bipartisan stimulus package that was awaiting Trump's signature. Larry Summers, former Treasury Secretary and head of the National Economic Council, appeared on Bloomberg TV, which is owned by Mike Bloomberg. And they gave him extensive room to talk about how you think the $2,000 checks don't make much sense. He was talking about the idea that it would overheat the economy, which refers to the idea that the amount of money moving around the economy exceeds its capacity and can lead to inflation. Now, this completely ignores the purpose of these checks. It's not so that people can go out and buy TVs and go out to dinner. For most people, these $2,000 checks are going to be to pay back rents or pay bills that they haven't been able to pay because people have been out of work and the economy has been completely and utterly disrupted by this pandemic. I mean, it's out of touch, but it also plays into the economic interests of people who don't really want people to get a taste of something approximating like relief or universal basic income or anything borderline humane that people in the rest of the world have largely been getting. Now, it goes on to talk about, on January 26th, the Washington Post boosted a study hastily thrown together by economists at Harvard from a think tank called Opportunity Insights. It happens to be funded by the family foundations of Mark Zuckerberg, Mike Bloomberg, and Bill Gates. And it's like, I wish these right wingers actually focused on the stuff like Bill Gates actually does. He's not putting, chips in your vaccine or whatever. He is trying to stop you from getting money.
It shows the most farmland.
Oh yeah, yeah. Anyway, it turned out like that analysis from Opportunity Insights was based on consumer spending data. Um, and they were the ones that recommend this whole like means testing, like people making more than 50 grand a year shouldn't get it. That's not a minor tweak. That would deny or reduce aid to nearly half of Americans according to the census. And the pandemic has hit lower income households particularly hard, but it shows about 45% of households earning between 50 to 150 grand have also lost employment income since the pandemic started, which is what I just said. there's, and there's another major problem with cutting people out this way. Most Americans' payments will go out based on their 2019 income, unless they file their 2021 early, which means it's going to be based on their income figures from a year when we weren't in the middle of a pandemic. So the Washington Post has come out against him. Bloomberg has shows on MSNBC like Morning Joe have come out and featured these figures. They had Stephen Ratner on arguing it raises significant questions about the size of the stimulus checks and who should get them, blah, blah, blah. The media distorted discourse has had its intended reverberations where we're actually having these debates about how many people should get this money, even though it would really be political suicide for the Democrats to restrict this more. Honestly, I think it's already political suicide that they reduced it from $2,000 to $1,400 based on some weird wonk technicality. And God, I hope somebody fixes that. Otherwise, the QAnon people are going to win a landslide in 2 years. Anyway, there was problems in the study. Media elites moved on a half-baked study all the way around Washington and decision desks, roundtables, while its key details were kept under wraps. Indeed, CBS, Fox, Business, CNBC, Forbes, all of them have coverage about this, but none of them looked into the details of the data being used by the group. Probably because the technical appendix wasn't added to the one-page study online until last Thursday, more than a week after the study started making headlines. And what it showed is the study is supposed to show that higher income households didn't experience much of a spending boost from the period's stimulus checks. But the study extrapolates household income from zip code level income data that is at least a couple of years old. And there's two problems with this. The income data that the study uses predates the pandemic, and using zip code level income data doesn't capture household income very well anyway, because within zip codes, there's a wide range of household incomes. And, I think I'll just go cap off, again, go read this article. But it's basically, the media latching onto this, again, we're not talking about big cabal or conspiracy or anything, but so many people who run these networks and these newspapers have an economic incentive to make sure money goes to them and not to average working people. And so you get these stories repeated to the right-wing ecosystem that have absolutely nothing to do with what the public actually wants or what is good political strategy for anybody. And of course, let's not talk about austerity and stuff, because the money's there. The money is there to give relief. Countries far poorer than ours have been giving people like monthly $2,000 checks. So, don't give me that malarkey. And this also goes back to ideas of, Noam Chomsky wrote a lot about manufacturing consent, how the news media tries to use its coverage to kind of make people believe things that are against their own interest. Now, granted, it's not going to work this time. That's why we've already seen pushback against this. That's why we've already seen the Biden administration walk back means testing. Because when you promise people $2,000, that's a very solid, concrete promise. That's not something that you can back out of or make ambiguous. People are going to pin you down and nail you down for that. And what's kind of happened is the media has had an outsized influence on the pundit class to wonkify this issue more than it needs to be. Send out the $2,000 checks. Send them out. If not, if you don't, not only is it political malpractice, and you're gonna, I mean, God, the Republicans will have a field day with it in 2 years, but again, it's just cruel and inhumane to means test something based on data uh, from before the crisis even started. And we could talk a lot about like the inefficiencies of capitalism and stuff, but like I think what it boils down to is like our government is so baked into these ideas about making sure like spend as little as possible, austerity, making sure we listen to our donors for anybody else that we are what I mean, capitalism's everywhere, but this is one of the few countries where this would even be a serious point of debate. And it really goes to show the outsized power that the mainstream corporate media has on our discourse, that Congress is still playing patty cake with these $2,000 checks when like you could drive 300 miles to the east of here in Canada, and people are getting that just about every day.